Gavel? That's all right. The commission will come to order, and I want to thank all of you for being here. My good friend and colleague, Jim McGovern, is on his way. He'll be here shortly. He was up to the middle of the night working on the farm bill, so he will be here very shortly. But thank you for being here. I want to welcome especially not only our distinguished witnesses, but we do have a delegation from Romania here. We're very, very happy to have them here, including George Nicolae Simeon. Thank you for joining us today. You know, going way back, one of the first issues I worked on as a member of Congress in 1982, 83, was Romania and Nicholas Ceausescu's horrific dictatorship. And I know there's still many, many pressing problems, including organizations like your own that get delisted and discriminated against. So it's really good to have you here, and I thank you for that this morning. As the United States assumes the 2026 presidency of the G20, the administration has a rare opportunity to promote human rights within the world's leading forum for international economic cooperation. The G20 rightly focuses on macroeconomic stability, financial regulation, energy policy, and trade, vital priorities that foster growth and prosperity. As President Trump has rightly stated, that these issues will be the core of this year's G20 agenda. This emphasis is essential. Focus on the core issues of growth and stability rather than the endless expansion into peripheral bureaucratic issues, which is what the world needs and wants from the G20 right now. At the same time, focus on the core issues does not in any way preclude human rights issues from the G20, since several crisis issues touch on these core issues each and every day. The economy exists to promote human flourishing, and people do not flourish apart from certain respect for fundamental rights and freedoms. That is why today's hearing will explore how human rights, especially freedom of religion or belief and freedom of speech, can be elevated during the G20 presidency. One of the most pressing crises today is the denial of freedom of religion, of the right of people of faith free from fear and persecution. According to Open Doors, approximately 25,000 Christians have been killed for their faith globally in the past 5 years alone, and many more years to date over the last couple of decades. Most of them were killed in situations of some connivance or complicity on the part of the government. Ancient Christian communities in Syria, Iraq, Nagorno-Karabakh, Turkey, Egypt, and elsewhere in the Middle East and Africa have in the past 20 years been ethnically cleansed, really genocide, or threatened, harassed, and persecuted, in many cases, into near extinction, and the virus still spreads. I want to thank President Trump for his support of the Nigerians. I've been working on that issue for more than 20 years. He has conveyed to the world that they are a CPC country and liable to very significant sanctions unless the government ends its complicity in the attacks on Christians and non-Islamist Muslims. I point that out because I've been there many times, and I always meet with the Muslims when I'm there, and they're a threat as well. The Christians, even more so, they kill more. But the Muslims, if they are not towing the line with Boko Haram or the Fulani or ISIS West Africa, all of a sudden they find themselves being murdered as well. So we need to speak out for all. It would be a missed opportunity for the G20 to meet in the United States and this issue not be raised of religious freedom and freedom of speech. The G20 is the leading and perhaps only effective international forum for cooperation among leading powers, both Christian, Jewish, Muslim, and Hindu, at a time when broad civilizational tensions between them seem to be tragically increasing. At the same time, cooperation and dialogue in matters touching on religion has not been on the G20 agenda since 2022. One promising avenue for putting it on the G20 agenda is the G20 Religion Forum, known as R20. In 2022, under Indonesia's G20 presidency, the first R20 International Summit of Religious Leaders was incorporated into the official program of the G20 main events. As the very distinguished and good friend for decades, Professor Maryanne Glendon wrote in The First Things, this marked the first time the G20 formally acknowledged that religion can and should function as a source of global solutions rather than merely as a source of conflict. The R20, organized by Indonesia's Nahdlatul Ulama, the world's largest Muslim organization, led by Yahya Saquf, they've undertaken a significant effort to promote a pluralistic and tolerant vision of Islam and to marginalize extremist ideologies that fuel violence and terror. The R20 communique in Bali called for, and I quote, a global alliance founded upon shared civilizational values and for preventing the political weaponization of identity and curtailing communal hatred. Religious believers constitute more than 80% of the world's population. And if the G20 is serious about inclusive and sustainable development, it cannot ignore the moral and cultural forces that shape the lives of billions, including their economic lives. The R20 offers a vehicle for engaging in religious leaders in communities and addressing religious persecution, identity-based violence, modern slavery, displacement, and threats posed by emerging technologies, including AI. I urge the Trump administration to consider formally recognizing the R20 as a permanent G20 engagement group. The R20 would strengthen the cause of human dignity, amplify voices committed to peace, pluralism, and freedom, and help counter religious extremism and defend persecuted minorities. For this reason, it deserves serious consideration and, I hope, acceptance by the administration. Another human right with profound economic implications that demands inclusion in the G20's core economic and policy coordination agenda is freedom of speech. Around the world, including in several G20 countries, regulatory pressures on media and online expression are intensifying, often under the guise of combating misinformation or hate speech. Now, nobody agrees with hate speech or incitement to violence. That will be absolutely condemned and prosecuted, but that's not what we're talking about here. In parts of Europe and elsewhere, an epidemic of state and NGO-driven censorship has emerged, where laws ostensibly aimed at public safety are weaponized to silence dissent, suppress religious viewpoints, and marginalize political opposition. This phenomenon is amplified by a censorship industrial complex, a network of governments, technology platforms, NGOs, and international bodies that under the banner of safety or order, the platform demonizes and stigmatizes lawful speech. Religious perspectives, especially on issues of life, family, and human identity, frequently face discrimination in context of these modern practices. The G20's Digital Economy Working Group and related discussions on information integrity, digital trust, and platform governance provide natural venues to elevate these issues, ensuring commitments to an open, innovation-driven digital economy aligned with human rights rather than enabling suppression. By encouraging engagement groups to prioritize principles of sovereignty, transparency, accountability, and religious freedom, and free expression, and by insisting on clarity in funding and governance for civil society participants, the U.S. can help shape a leader's declaration that delivers not only technocratic consensus, but genuine moral clarity on defending open discourse as essential to global economic vitality and human flourishing. I'd like to now yield to my distinguished colleague, Jim McGovern, co-chair.
Well, thank you very much, Co-Chair Smith, and I want to welcome everyone to today's hearing on opportunities to promote human rights at the 2026 G20 Summit. I apologize for being a little late. I always get lost in this building. I've been working here for 100 years, and I still get confused when I walk into Rayburn. But in any event, I'm here. The Group of 20, or G20, is a forum for advancing international cooperation among the world's largest economies. This year, the presidency of the summit is held by the United States. Parallel to the G20 process, engagement groups gathered to form policy recommendations on a wide variety of topics, 5 years ago, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia hosted the W20 Women's Summit in conjunction with its G20 presidency. That event coincided with limited reforms by the Saudi government to increase the freedom of women, but it did not translate into meaningful advancements in the ability of the Saudi people, men or women, to exercise the full spectrum of human rights. As I noted at a commission hearing in 2020, hosting the W20 was part of a strategy by Mohamed bin Salman, the guy who ordered the execution of Jamal Khashoggi, to improve his country's reputation. Engagement groups can do important work, and we will hear from witnesses involved in such efforts. But the Saudi example also reminds us that global forums can be used by governments to polish their image and whitewash serious human rights violations. This concern is relevant as we consider proposals to recognize additional engagement groups within the G20 process, such as the Religion 20. As we will hear today, the United States is not currently well positioned to be a leader on human rights. I worry that this G20 will be used to whitewash human rights abuses, as we saw in Saudi Arabia. Our ability to press other countries to protect fundamental freedoms is proportional to our willingness to do that work ourselves. Yet here at home, our rights are under assault. Freedom of expression, for example, is facing what one human rights attorney called, quote, the gravest assault on freedom of speech, at least since the McCarthy era. How can this White House effectively combat supposed censorship abroad while it enables censorship at home by restricting press access to the executive branch, supporting bans on books, that don't meet the ruling party's ideological tests, and repressing independent media through the FCC? Challenges to freedom of religion have taken a variety of forms. This year's G20 summit will be hosted in Florida, where religion is being weaponized to pass laws that infringe on bodily autonomy through extreme restrictions on reproductive health care. A synagogue sued to block Florida's 15-week abortion ban. It argued that the law codifies a specific religious view and impedes the practice of Judaism, which permits and sometimes requires abortion to protect the mother. Freedom of religion is not a license to impose religion. Our foreign policy infrastructure for promoting human rights, including religious freedom, has also been attacked. As we will hear, key provisions of the International Religious Freedom Act remain unfulfilled. The State Department never released its 2024 IRF report. No new country of particular concern or special watch list designations were made beyond Nigeria, and the position of Ambassador at Large on international religious freedom remains vacant. The preferential treatment of Christianity and demonization of Islam by administration officials and members of Congress severely undermines the efforts we do make to promote international religious freedom. In a recent speech, Defense Secretary Hegseth blurred administration policies with Christian edicts, calling them, quote, not political, but, quote, biblical. And just yesterday, Speaker Mike Johnson called Iranian followers of a misguided religion. By their own words, this administration thinks human rights are optional. It imposes the language of natural rights and Western values, labels that are reinterpreted and narrowed to restrict universal rights and exclude marginalized groups. Human rights, my friends, are not optional. They are fundamental to the protection of human dignity, and they are enshrined in it represents an opportunity to raise human rights issues with world leaders. The G20 Interfaith Forum already ensures that discussions on religious freedom and other rights are substantive, inclusive, and principled. I encourage those who attend to take that opportunity seriously. But it would be irresponsible and frankly unconvincing for the United States to speak about moral leadership on human rights without first confronting real concerns about our own record. And with that, I thank the panelists for being here, and I look forward to hearing your testimony.
Thank you. Let me introduce our very distinguished witnesses. As you probably know, there is a fundamental difference between my good friend and colleague, Mr. McGovern, and I on issues like the right to life of unborn children.
But we love each other anyway.
That's right. And we do respect each other. I do believe that life begins at the moment of conception, that birth is an event that happens to each and every one of us, and that abortion is violence not only against the child through dismemberment or through the abortion pill. And let's remember how the abortion pill actually works. It starves the infant to death. That's how it works. It also, now we know from a very serious study that just under 1 out of every 10 women who take the abortion pill have serious adverse consequences to her life, including sepsis and hemorrhaging. So it is a very serious issue. We have a fundamental disagreement, but I believe the human rights part of that errs on the side of protecting innocent individuals, mothers and babies, from the violence of abortion. But
We won't debate this issue here.
You brought it up.
Right, but I appreciate it.
all right. Thank you so much. And again, we have an extraordinarily distinguished panel here today. I would like to start with Maryanne Glendon, who's a learned head professor of law at the Harvard University and a former U.S. ambassador to the Holy See. I'm delighted to say she gave a very distinguished service to our country and to the world in that capacity. And I have read so much of what she has written over the years, and it always is inspiring in the extreme. She's a leading scholar in human rights, comparative law, and political theory. Maryanne Glendon chaired the U.S. Department of Commission on Inalienable Rights from 2019 to 2020, and served on the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom and the President's Council on Bioethics. In 2006, she was awarded the National Humanities Medal, and in 1991, she was elected to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. She also represented the Holy See at major international gatherings, including the 95 UN Women's Conference in Beijing, and I was there as well for well over a week. Maryanne is the author of numerous influential and widely translated books, including A World Made New, Rights Talk, A Nation Under Lawyers, and the Transformation of Family Law. We'll then hear from Mr. C. Holland Taylor, who's special advisor for international affairs to the chairman of the Nalatu Ulamu organization, the world's largest Muslim organization with over 100 million followers. For more than 2 decades, he has worked with reform-minded Muslim leaders to promote a progressive and tolerant understanding of Islam and to counter violent extremism efforts highlighted by major U.S. outlets. He is co-founder and leader of several affiliated initiatives, including the Center for Shared Civilization Values, the CSCV. Mr. Taylor has spent decades living and working in the Muslim world and is a specialist on the Islamization of Java. We'll then hear from Michael. Michael's not here yet? He's going to be, that's right, of course. Michael Shellenberger will serve as the CBC Chair of Politics, Censorship, and Free Speech, and he'll be coming in by way of the internet. A position dedicated to advancing the study of censorship and the political, technological, economic, and cultural forces that face the suppression of speech. A best-selling author and publisher of the Twitter Files, he has reported on major controversies, including government and social media modernization practices, urban drug policy, homelessness policy, and climate-related debates. He frequently has testified and advises governments on free speech. He is also a founder of Public News. We'll then hear from Dr. Mohamed Elsanousi. Am I saying that right? We have been together many times, and he is the executive director of the Network for Religious and Traditional Peacemakers, a global coalition that connects grassroots peacemaker builders with international stakeholders to strengthen collective efforts towards a sustainable peace. He also currently serves as a commissioner on the U.S. Commission of International Religious Freedom. We were together just a few days ago at a roundtable, and he did a tremendous job at that, again, pushing for religious liberty everywhere. He previously served as Interfaith and Government Religious Director at the Islamic Society of North America and contributed to the U.S. Department of Religion and Foreign Policy Working Group. Then we'll hear from Scott Busby, a special advisor for Human Rights First, an organization whose mission is to ensure that the U.S. is a global leader on human rights, and they've been tireless advocates throughout the world for many, many decades. He has worked for over 30 years on human rights issues, refugee and migration issues with the U.S. government and UN. Most recently, Scott served for 10 years as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State in the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor at the U.S. Department of State. So very, very distinguished witnesses, and I'd like to yield now to Dr. Maryanne Glendon.
Thank you, Chairman Smith. Chairman Smith and Chairman McGovern from my home state, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to say a few words about why I believe that the R20 would have several advantages at this year's G20 meeting. Advantages for the G20 itself, for the United States, and for the causes that are dear to all of our hearts, universal human rights and religious freedom, at a time when the very concept of universal human rights is faltering to the point where major human rights organizations have described it as actually in crisis, falling away on the part of liberal democracies in support of human rights in their foreign policy, and a certain amount of suspicion and resentment about universal human rights in countries who feel that more powerful interests are imposing ideas that are inimical to their cultures in the name of human rights without foundation in the Universal Declaration. So on the question of how and why the R20, which was introduced by Indonesia in 2022 at their presidency of the G20 meeting, I think that the reasons that compelled them are even stronger when it comes to the presidency of the United States. First and foremost, what the R20 brought to the G20, I believe for the first time, is a heightened awareness of something that is all too often a missing element in deliberations about economic policy. Economic policymakers are very aware of religion and its influence, I should say maybe aware of activities in the name of religion that are often impediments to reaching the goals for which the G20 was founded. But they are less aware of two other things. One, the way in which abundant social science evidence now shows that religion correlates very highly with the success of all the G20 goals. And the R20, I would say, has done for the Human Rights Project, it introduced deliberation by leaders of all the major religions, the religious community, on two factors that are incredibly relevant to economic growth and prosperity, namely the use of religion as a pretext for violence and violence in the name of religion. So what the religion can do for G20 can do and has done and will continue to do is advance a part of economic policy making that cannot be ignored. As mentioned already, 4/5 of the world's population are affiliated with some religion. Religious beliefs have, for better or for worse, an impact on achievement of the G20 goals. It's simply a no-brainer that it has to be brought to the table. So what the R20 brought was not specific policy recommendations. The R20 brought a group of major religious leaders to frankly admit and discuss with each other ways in which religion concretely can be part of the solution to the world's problems and not form a contributor to the problem. Now, for many of the same reasons, I would say the R20 would benefit the United States, but there are some additional reasons. The R20, as a byproduct of this bringing religion into the discussion, it initiated a process, which continues now. It initiated a process on the part of major religious leaders to talk about sensitive subjects that actually are very little discussed or acknowledged at meetings like this. How do you want to concretely make religion a source of solutions? You've got to confront historical grievances, sensitive. You've got to confront that there may be within each religious tradition certain elements, historical and cultural accretions that have crept in that have nothing to do with the core of the religion, but are problematic in terms of world peace. So that work that was begun spectacularly at the first R20, that work, I think, would progress. It would be accelerated under the presidency of the United States of the G20. Now, finally, with regard to human rights and religious freedom, for me, as someone who attended that first R20, one of the most striking things, I should say, as someone also who is a historian of the Universal Human Rights Project post-World War II, what was stunning to me was the outpouring of enthusiasm for the 1948 Declaration as a still valid compendium of the fundamental principles, rather small core of fundamental principles on which you can find roots in all or nearly all, I have to say nearly all because not in materialism or atheism, but fundamental principles that can find roots in most of the world's major philosophical and religious traditions. It was stunning to me because we are currently in a moment, as the representative from Massachusetts has mentioned, we're in a moment where the idea of universality of human rights is under attack, and it's being eroded from within. It is a crisis. So to showcase the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and broad agreement on it, and to celebrate religious freedom, which is not only one of America's most cherished freedoms, but is one that can't be said enough. It is one of the few rights in the Universal Declaration that has been made non-derogable by international treaty, which means religious freedom, like those other non-derogable rights, cannot be suspended even in time of emergency. So for all those reasons, I would argue that the R20 at this particular moment would be a most valuable addition to the program of the G20. Thank you very much.
Ambassador Glendon, thank you very much for your testimony, for your leadership, and look forward to asking some questions. But I really appreciate your boldness for decades. So thank you. Mr.
Thank you, Chairman Smith. Thank you, Chairman McGovern, honorable members of the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission, the General Chairman of Nahdlatul Ulama, the world's largest Muslim organization, is well aware of this hearing. Haji Yahya Khalil Stakov personally asked me to convey his greetings and thanks to you for convening this important hearing. Thank you for inviting me to appear before this commission to discuss how U.S. recognition of the G20 Religion Forum, or R20, offers a once-in-a-generation opportunity to position human rights at the heart of the world's political and economic agenda. A distinguished coalition of 84 American religious leaders and foreign policy experts representing a broad spectrum of faith traditions, including my colleague and fellow expert witness, Professor Maryanne Glendon, wrote to President Trump in November of 2025, urging him to officially, quote, recognize the R20 summit as part of America's G20 presidency in 2026. For the past 23 years, I have worked closely with senior leaders of Nahdlatul Ulama, or NU, to counter Islamist terrorism, promote human rights, and foster international peace, security, and prosperity. In 2003, I established LibFrau Foundation with longtime NU chairman and former Indonesian President Kiai Haji Abdurrahman Wahid, whom the Wall Street Journal described as, quote, the single most influential religious leader in the Muslim world. President Wahid was the living embodiment of an ancient civilizational tradition that combined the profound moral and spiritual teachings of Islam with the wisdom of his Javanese ancestors, who preserved a pluralistic and tolerant, rather than a supremacist or violent, understanding of religion following their conversion to Islam in the early 16th century. As journalist Brett Stevens noted in an article titled "The Last King of Java," President Wahid's Muslim ancestors defeated the 16th century equivalent of ISIS. And they reestablished, I stress that, reestablished freedom of religion for all Javanese in 1586. This was 200 years before similar ideas took firm political root in the West through passage of the Virginia Statute of Religious Freedom and the First Amendment to the United States Constitution. Given this history, it may come as no surprise that in 2015, Nahdlatul Ulama launched what the New York Times described as, quote, the opening salvo in a global campaign by the world's largest Muslim group to challenge Islamic State ideology head-on. In 2017, Gerakan Pemuda Ansor, NU's 8 million-member young adults organization, launched the humanitarian Islam movement, which seeks to restore rahmah, the Arabic term for universal love and compassion, to its rightful place as a primary message of Islam. In February of 2019, Nahdlatul Ulama ruled that the classical Islamic legal category of infidel, or kafir, which has long cast a shadow over the faith's relationship with other religions, is no longer relevant as a legal concept within modern nation states. At a gathering of some 20,000 religious scholars in Banjar, West Java, Nahdlatul Ulama endorsed the concept of a nation state rather than a caliphate, and recognized all citizens, irrespective of religion, ethnicity, or creed, as having equal rights and obligations. The implications of these rulings for universal human rights may be glimpsed from the fact that, absent the fiqh or legal category of infidel, there is no theological basis for Muslims to foster enmity or perpetrate acts of violence, such as jihadi terrorism, against those perceived to be non-Muslim. On December 24th, 2021, a close disciple of Abdurrahman Wahid, Kiai Haji Yahya Stakov, was elected General Chairman of the Nahdlatul Ulama Central Board, a position President Wahid held from 1984 to 1999. One of Mr. Stakov's first acts after his election as NU chairman was to establish the R20 in March 2022 in conjunction with Indonesia's G20 presidency that year. The government of Indonesia incorporated the inaugural R20 Summit of International Religious Leaders into the program of G20 main events and recognized the R20 as an official G20 engagement group, the first time that religion was ever placed on the formal G20 agenda. In the words of Mr. Stakov, quote, the purpose of the R20 is to ensure that religion functions as a genuine and dynamic source of solutions rather than problems in the 21st century. Through the R20, we hope to facilitate the emergence of a global movement in which people of goodwill of every faith and nation will help bring the world's geopolitical and economic power structures into alignment with the highest moral and spiritual values for the sake of all humanity. By giving public voice to the highest common denominator among our shared civilizational values, the R20 strives to mobilize religious authorities and their communities, who represent over 80% of our global population, to prevent the political weaponization of identity, curtail the spread of communal hatred, promote solidarity and respect among the diverse peoples, cultures, and nations of the world, and foster the emergence of a more just and harmonious world order founded upon respect for the equal rights and dignity of every human being. Thank you for your time and attention.
Mr. Taylor, thank you very much. Without objection, all of your full statements will be made as part of the record. And again, we really appreciate your look back. I mean, well before our religious freedom principles were put into place, including the First Amendment. 200 years, did you say, before that? This was already being done.
Yes, sir.
In Indonesia or Java. So thank you so much for that. I'd like to now go to Mr. Shellenberger. Can't hear you.
Thank you, Chairman Smith and Chairman McGovern.
A little louder. Sorry.
Can you hear me now?
Just barely.
Uh-oh.
They're going to put your volume up, I think.
Yeah.
Put my volume up?
Oh, that's perfect. We got it.
Okay. Chairman Smith and Chairman McGovern, thank you for inviting me to testify. In the spring of 2024, 2 years ago, G20 leaders announced that they were united in their fight against disinformation and hate speech, which was a central theme of the Brazilian government's G20 presidency. The goal was to promote the integrity of information in the digital environment, they said, which involved fighting hate speech and threats to democracy. While that may sound positive, the reality is that what the G20 was trying to do was to establish a sweeping global system of near total online censorship. It did this by joining alongside the European Union, the United Nations, the World Economic Forum, and most Western nations in demanding the right to force TikTok, Meta, and X, and other social media platforms to take down content that politicians, NGOs, corporate leaders, and others might disapprove of, even though that speech is legal. We're only talking about legal speech here. The representatives of these institutions, including the G20, insisted that they weren't calling for censorship. They were just saying that they wanted the platforms to be more transparent and to share data with them, particularly with the non-governmental organizations that they chose. But this is in truth, this is the strategy that governments have been using to get around the First Amendment and other protections of free speech. It's been to create supposedly independent third-party NGOs or academics at universities to serve as what they call trusted flaggers of supposed hate speech and misinformation. So in the United States in 2020, the Department of Homeland Security authorized so-called researchers at Stanford, also University of Washington, to secretly demand from Twitter, Facebook, and other social media platforms censorship on election and COVID issues. And we also see politicians and governments in Germany, France, Brazil, the UK, all doing the same thing in terms of pursuing this model of censorship by proxy. In fact, just last month, the House Judiciary Committee revealed that the European Union had been doing this for over a decade. You know, we had been warning that the European Union was trying to censor our social media platforms, including Americans on those platforms. And then we learned that, in fact, the European Union was already doing this. They had 100 closed door meetings. They were threatening financial penalties up to 6% of global revenue. And essentially, you had unelected bureaucrats in Europe dictating the boundaries of public discourse in the United States and other countries on a whole set of issues, including migration, climate change, and COVID, thereby bypassing the First Amendment entirely. These are things that they pressure the platforms to do in the name of fighting disinformation and hate speech, but effectively served as government censorship. There's a history to this, which I've described in my testimony. Much of it can be traced back to 2016. It's very tied in with the foreign policy establishment to try to get control over what is allowed on social media platforms. But it's really gone out of control, particularly in the UK. 30 people are being arrested per day in Britain for offensive social media posts. It's also trying to censor 4chan, even though it has it has no servers in the UK. And we also see all these countries are at the same time seeking to impose, to end anonymity online and require people to use a digital ID to access social media. And that would give unprecedented amounts of control to unelected people. This is happening very dramatically in Brazil, which is perhaps why it wasn't surprising that it used its presidency to try to take this whole model global, including the United States. Brazil's been arresting people, incarcerating people for legal social media content. It's been threatening the prosecution of journalists, including myself and my colleagues, just for publishing the Twitter Files Brazil. I think there's a couple of things that are important to do here. I would say three things that are important. The first, Chairman Smith, as you said, I think that the G20 I think most people would agree the G20 has experienced mission creep. It was supposed to deal with financial crises, and then it just, over the years, mostly the government bureaucrats that are part of it have all sought new things for the G20 to do and justifying them as related to the economy. That includes health, climate change, security issues, and this underlying now demand for censorship, for global censorship. I think it's transparently coming from the fact that so many of the leaders of these G20 countries are unpopular. The three countries that have been at the forefront of censorship, which is Britain, France, and Germany. You see the British Prime Minister's approval rate is 18%, the German Chancellor's is 23%, and the French President's is around 25%. So instead of dealing with the reasons that these leaders might be unpopular, their policies might be unpopular, they're seeking to censor ordinary people for criticizing them and their policies. So I think this is a clear and present danger to free speech. The first thing would be just to push back against the mission creep. The second thing I would urge Congress and the Trump administration, make a clear statement now that G20 is in favor of free speech, and it does not believe that governments should be telling social media platforms who to censor. This should be very basic. And I think a third thing, Chairman Smith, would be, some sort of a letter to G20 leaders, to the president, to urge them to really establish free speech as a first principle for the organization. I could make an argument for you about why free speech is good for economic growth, which I think it clearly is. It allows for the flourishing of science and innovation, but free speech is a fundamental moral value without which we are really servants to our leaders, and we need to be we're the people that empower our leaders, and we give them their authority, and we get free speech not from the government. This is the American tradition. We don't get free speech from the government. Free speech is an inalienable human right. It's something that we're born with, and clearly it's now something that we need to defend. Thank you very much.
Mr. Shellenberger, thank you very much for your testimony and suggestions. Both Mr. McGovern and I have chaired and co-chaired the China Commission for years. I'm currently the chair. He's the ranking member. If this place ever flips, he'd be the chair and I'd be the ranking member. But we consistently speak out on China because there's an absolute lack of free speech there. Jimmy Lai is the quintessential proof of that right now, getting 20 years for his Apple News and the tremendous work he's done. He's also being persecuted because he's a Catholic and a very staunch and strong believer in God. And just like we're seeing with the Tibetan Buddhists, the Uyghurs, where there's a genocide, China is a quintessential example of the opposite of all of this. So it's important, again, that these two fundamental principles be advanced. So thank you, Mr. Shellenberger. We now will hear from Dr. Elsanousi, who's, again, he's a distinguished member of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, and I thank him for being here. Doctor.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Chairman Smith, and thank you so much, Chairman McGovern, honorable members of the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission. Thank you so much for your kind invitation to testify today. I deeply appreciate the Commission's steadfast commitment to advancing human rights and religious freedom for everyone, everywhere, all the time. And I am testifying today in my personal capacity and not as a commissioner in the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom. In fact, this particular hearing comes at a pivotal moment as our nation prepares to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence this July. We are reminded that religious freedom stands among the foundational rights envisioned by our founders. When drafting the Declaration and later enshrining protections in the United States Constitution and First Amendments, our founders, they recognized religious liberty not merely as a private privilege, but as a fundamental human rights. Thomas Jefferson himself drew from diverse sacred texts, including the Holy Quran, to underscore that religious freedom is consistent with the deepest moral commitment of humanity. So today, there is growing empirical evidence demonstrating the strong correlation between religious freedom and other social goods, political stability, economic development, and social harmony, and national security. Importantly, there remains broad bipartisan agreement on the value of advancing this freedom globally. So I welcome the focus of this hearing. Religious communities, as just also mentioned briefly, make indispensable contributions to the global agenda. They are central to healthcare delivery, education, disaster response, poverty alleviation, economic opportunity, and of course, social cohesion. So in many regions, religious actors are among the most trusted institutions in society. So every major policy challenge has a religious dimension. So over the past 12 years, the interfaith engagement process associated with the G20, often referred to F20, has brought a practical experience and the teaching of the broad range of religious communities into conversation with global economic leaders. Interfaith 20 has collaborated closely with the Vatican, with ministers of religious affairs from around the world, and has been formally recognized by several G20 host countries, including Saudi Arabia, Germany, Italy, and Brazil. I was blessed to attend actually a number of Interfaith 20 meetings since it was established in 2014. At the same time, we also must recognize the limit of the G20 framework. Since its founding in the 1999, the G20 has been primarily geared toward economic coordination. It has never explicitly addressed religious freedom matters, and that omission has been deliberate. While the agenda has expanded to include aspects of sustainable development goals. So the G20 basically, as a forum, might not be appropriate one to address directly religious freedom violations or broader human rights concerns. As we approach both the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence and the upcoming G20 summit being hosted this year by the United States, I recommend that the United States Department of State, particularly the International Religious Freedom Office, to take the lead in engaging with religious actors in an inclusive manner, building upon the practical collaborations faith communities brought to Interfaith 20 have sustained since 2014. Such an initiative, led by the State Department, should not endorse any group. Rather, it would build on the successful strategic religious engagement seen during the first Trump administration and previous administrations, an approach that sought inclusive collaboration with diverse religious communities worldwide, ensuring that no one was left behind. I strongly support elevating the positive contributions of religious communities within the G20 process. But the recognition must be broad and substantive. Religious communities are not only contributors to economic prosperity and social harmony, they are on the front lines of combating human trafficking, preparing for and responding to disasters, and countering violent extremism. This all requires highlighting religious freedom as a pillar of democratic governance and economic flourishing. The experience and reach of religious communities representing the large majority of the world's population, as was just mentioned as well, make them indispensable partners across virtually all policy domains. However, we seek to lift religious freedom internationally and strengthen our strategic religious engagement globally. We must also acknowledge serious institution setbacks in our policy implementations here at home, as was just mentioned by Chair McGovern. So the State Department has yet to release the 2024 International Religious Freedom Report. Now nearly a year overdue, this is not a minor bureaucratic lapse. The International Religious Freedom Report is the official United States government account of religious freedom conditions abroad and forms the basis for annual designation of countries of particular concern. As of this testimony today, those designations of countries of particular concerns have not been updated. The prior administrations have effectively lapsed. The prior designations have effectively lapsed. Aside from the unique presidential designation of Nigeria by President Trump that we all welcome, there are currently no active designations of egregious violators of religious freedom. None for China, none for Iran, none for North Korea. This is not simply a policy adjustment. It represents a failure to utilize the tools Congress has enacted. Institutionally, further concerns remain. An ambassador at large for international religious freedom has not been confirmed. Raising questions under the International Religious Freedom Act, whether a special advisor on international religious freedom on the National Security Council will be named, as contemplated by law, remains unclear. The Office of International Religious Freedom has been downgraded within the State Departments. within the State Department's structure, and staffing has reportedly been reduced remarkably. The 2025 National Security Strategy contains no substantive reference to international religious freedom. I would also be missed if I did not mention here that the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, and the United States Institute of Peace, which were previously engaged in important religious freedom and religious engagement efforts, are no longer pursuing this work around the world. We hear from people on the ground that this is remain a problem for them to continue advancing religious freedom. If we are serious about advancing religious freedom globally, we must fully utilize the mechanisms Congress has established and restore institutional strength to this cause. Finally, our national interest requires broad collaboration with the Muslim world. Demographically, the future of Islam is in Asia. I can mention Indonesia, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and India hold the world's largest Muslim population. This means that as our country national security strategy begin to center more and more on Asia, we need to use platforms such as the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, where China already has significant presence. We need to use the OIC to advance our interests. The spread of Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, and the persecution and discrimination of Muslims in countries such as Myanmar, China, and India should be of significant concern to proponents of religious freedom and religious tolerance everywhere. Further, significant persecution of Christian communities and other religious minorities occurs by individuals and entities that invoke a violent interpretation of Islam, which majority of Muslims around the world do not subscribe to. Indeed, the Muslim world is not monolithic. There are diverse expressions of leadership, scholarship, and reform. We should recognize and support significant declarations that affirm religious coexistence and minority protection. Chairman Smith and I spoke about this just last week. Declaration like the Marrakesh Declaration, issued by the Abu Dhabi Forum for Peace, and declaration like the Mecca Declaration issued by the Muslim World League are important examples and tools that could be used to advance religious freedom. These and similar initiatives emphasize the positive, moderate, and pluralistic traditions within Islam and affirm principles of citizenship and religious dignity. Engaging with these voices is strengthening both religious freedom and regional stability. I think, for example, on the people of Iran, who have been striving for such freedom and stability for decades. My thoughts and prayers are with all of those in Iran and around the world persecuted for their faith. As we approach our nation's 250th anniversary, we have an opportunity to renew our founding commitment. Religious freedom is not only an American constitutional principle, it is a universal human right. It contributes to economic prosperity, social harmony, and peace. It requires institutional seriousness at home and principled engagement abroad. So thank you so much for your leadership and commitment, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you so much.
Dr. Elsanousi, thank you very much for your testimony. I would like to acknowledge that as the Tam Lantos Commission, we have many distinguished people in the audience, but we have two who are very special, and that is Katrina Lantos Sweat, and she is a leader on religious freedom herself. And Annette, the two daughters of Tom Lantos. We're honored to have you here. Thank you. I'd like to now recognize Scott Busby.
Thank you, Co-Chair Smith, and thank you, Co-Chair McGovern, for having me here today. It's a privilege to return before you, this time representing civil society rather than the Department of State. Human Rights First, the organization with which I work now, believes strongly that the United States should lead the world on human rights. We also believe that the G20 presidency is just the kind of platform to demonstrate that leadership. But I must be frank and consistent with what Co-Chair McGovern said in his opening statement. Given this administration's systemic efforts to undermine the universal human rights framework, to dismantle the institutions in the U.S. government and internationally that promote human rights, and its commission of serious human rights violations both at home and overseas, we do not believe the United States is currently in a position to lead at the G20 or elsewhere on human rights. Let me briefly explain why and what would need to change to make that possible. First, one of the most telling signs of the Trump administration's approach to human rights is terminological. It appears to have abandoned the very concept of human rights. That term, for instance, does not appear once in the national security strategy. In its place, the administration is using the term natural rights, which I'm sorry to say is a much more selectively defined, narrowly reinterpreted list of rights as compared to the universal framework we spent decades building with allies and adversaries alike. As Professor Glendon has wonderfully documented in her book, and I recommend it to anyone who wants to understand the history of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the making of it, the Universal Declaration was inspired by multiple religious and philosophical traditions, including our own. The shift to natural rights limits who would enjoy human rights and dismisses abuses against those who don't fit the administration's political agenda. This is a betrayal of our own history and the history of the evolution of human rights internationally. The United States should recommit publicly to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the human rights treaties we have ratified as the foundation for our human rights advocacy. And let me just add here a note on religious freedom. We strongly support efforts to promote this fundamental right. But we also believed that those efforts cannot and should not be done in isolation from or prioritized over advocacy on other human rights. Violations of religious freedom typically occur in conjunctions with violations of many other human rights. One need look no further than China's treatment of the Uyghurs for a good example of this. Thus, we believe that advocacy for religious freedom is most effective when championed alongside the full spectrum of rights in the Universal Declaration. Second, we believe effective leadership on human rights requires consistency in analysis and advocacy, and the Trump administration has fallen woefully short on both of these as well. The national security strategy, for instance, is silent on the need to address human rights abuses in the Middle East, Asia, Africa, and Latin America, while elevating attention to alleged human rights concerns in Europe. It has significantly overhauled the State Department's human rights reports, eliminating full sections on elections, freedom of peaceful assembly and association, and discrimination of all types. Moreover, it gives countries like El Salvador and Hungary a clean bill of health, despite well-documented human rights and democracy issues there, while flagging alleged abuses in France, Germany, and the United Kingdom. This inverted scrutiny destroys the credibility that human rights leadership requires. Third, the administration has sought to dismantle the very institutions within the U.S. government and internationally that have been crucial to the global promotion of democracy and human rights. As to the U.S. government, it has eliminated altogether USAID's democracy programs, as well as most of the personnel and/or programs relating to my former bureau, that is, the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor, including the Office of International Religious Freedom and the Office to Monitor and Combat Trafficking in Persons. Here, I'd like to add that I noted with interest in the most recent appropriations bill, you all have made an effort to restore funding to some of these activities, and we greatly appreciate that. We just hope the administration will follow through on what the Congress has asked it to do. On the national front, the administration has also withdrawn from, in some cases, actively sought to undermine the UN Human Rights Council and its Universal Periodic Review process, the International Criminal Court, the Freedom Online Coalition, where we have been able to speak and work with other governments on online censorship, and UN Women, the UN organization dedicated to advancing the rights of women. These are not budget decisions. They are a strategic retreat from the international institutions where human rights norms are shaped and implemented, leaving a vacuum that China and Russia will fill. Fourth, no country can effectively champion human rights internationally while committing serious abuses at home and overseas. Federal agents have killed American citizens in our own cities, including Renee Good and Alex Preddy, and some federal immigration officers shot 14 people between September 2025 and late January 2026, killing 4. The administration has impeded independent investigations into these cases. Furthermore, 6 people died in ICE custody in January 2026 alone, adding to the 32 who died there in 2025. Thousands of people have been deported without due process, including many to third countries with serious human rights problems, including El Salvador, Cameroon, Eswatini, and South Sudan. These deportees, I should add, include members of persecuted religious minorities, as well as LGBT persons who have been sent to countries where such status is criminalized. Abroad, the Trump administration has conducted at least 44 airstrikes against alleged narco-traffickers in the Caribbean and Pacific since September 2025, killing at least 151 people with no legal process, no identification of victims, and no accountability. Stopping such boats is fundamentally a law enforcement matter, not a military one. A state intentionally killing someone who poses no imminent threat to life is rightfully termed an extrajudicial killing. The military invasions of Venezuela and Iran have been conducted without congressional or UN authorization, and they've only compounded the damage. We recognize both regimes are systemic human rights abusers, and we, along with many other human rights organizations, are committed to stemming the abuses committed by these regimes. But unaccountable force is not an effective or sustainable path to governments that respect democracy and human rights. Thus, we urge this commission to press the administration to, 1, recommit to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the human rights treaties which the U.S. has ratified as the foundation for U.S. human rights engagement. 2, to apply human rights standards consistently to all persons, all groups, and all regions, and to allies and adversaries alike. 3, to restore personnel and/or programs dedicated to human rights and democracy promotion at the State Department, and to support the international institutions committed to the same. And 4, to halt the detention practices, deportations, extrajudicial killings, and unauthorized military operations that are violating U.S. and international law and destroying the moral credibility without which human rights leadership is simply not possible. This commission has long served as a conscience of the Congress on human rights, and we're grateful for that leadership. We stand ready to work with you on a bipartisan basis to recover U.S. credibility as a genuine champion of human rights, both in the G20 and around the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Begin the questioning now, and let me just make a couple of notes, Mr. Busby, and follow up to your comments. I chaired all of the hearings on the International Religious Freedom Act of 1998, 97, 98, and the Clinton administration aggressively opposed it. Madeleine Albright, John Shattuck was the Assistant Secretary for Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor, and made very clear that they were against it. It would create a hierarchy of human rights. And I said to him at the time, and I said it to anyone who would listen, when I opposed what South Africa was doing to blacks under apartheid, which was an absolute obscene policy, there were some who disagreed that it would hurt Africans more than it would hurt the regime in Pretoria. but I felt it was required. Clinton did sign the IRFA bill, no doubt about it. But it was only because he was presented. It almost died in the Senate, death by 1,000 cuts. But it did get passed, it was signed, and he did sign it into law. But it was opposed every step of the way. In my first hearing after it was in effect, I asked the ambassador at large for religious freedom, did it create a hierarchy? He said, absolutely not. That it was not in lieu of any other, it was in addition to any other. Now, when the effort is made at G20, if it does prevail, that this initiative takes hold, it will help. China is part of the G20, as is Russia, but China is a part. And, they were not as boisterous against it when it happened in Indonesia. My hope is that we can try to influence there. I mean, there's no other country on earth, particularly in terms of population numbers, where people of faith of every kind are being so aggressively discriminated against to the point of genocide against the Muslim Uyghurs. So, but they do it against everybody. The Christians, they do it against the, obviously, Tibetan Buddhists. That's been a decades-long genocide, as we all know. So my hope is that this initiative look what Indonesia has done. I mean, it's just amazing. It's the largest Muslim-populated country in the world, and who is now taking the lead, has been for a long time, and has not been recognized for the way it should be, for the standard they've established, that the coexistence idea is very real, coexistence and respect for each other. Let me just also say, after Frank Wolf's bill was signed into law, I held, 45, 50 hearings on religious freedom. I did the Frank Wolf International Religious Freedom Act. I named it after him. He's a tremendous champion, in 2017. And that was signed into law, and that did entities of particular concern, a lot of other things that we couldn't get in that first bill, but tried. I asked the Obama administration, we've always had administrations that maybe have not done as much as they would want. They did not give us CPC countries year in and year out. So I had hearings on it, several, and said, where is the list? I don't have jurisdiction anymore on the subcommittee to do a hearing. I would right now, tomorrow, saying, let's get those CPC countries up here. I'm told that they're coming, but let's do it. Let's get it done so that those countries can be held accountable for, as a country of particular concern, vis-a-vis the provisions of the International Religious Freedom Act. I wrote the Frank Wolf bill, the Iraq and Syria Genocide and Relief Act. I had 7 hearings. Again, I respect the Obama administration, but they weren't helping the Chaldean Catholics at all. And I went there and met with them, and they were being completely left out. 7 hearings, we finally did a law. It was signed into law, and it provided them some relief, and that included the Yazidis as well. So there's been, and I've did a couple of laws on anti-Semitism, including creating the ambassador at large for anti-Semitism, and that position is filled. There was a person who was going to get that job, and he was blocked in the Senate for the religious freedom. And we're hoping that there will be an ambassador at large named soon to walk point on that issue. So the delay can be denial, but there's always problems in trying to get it done. And the Senate, as we know so well on all of our bills, is very often the place where good pieces of legislation die, as well as good nominations as we had for the IRFA position. So, what we're trying to do here is to say there's an opportunity to follow the tremendous lead of Indonesia, and thank you, Mr. Taylor, for your leadership on this, to say we can make a difference. G20 can make a difference on this. I have lost track of the number of imams I have met over the years and Catholic bishops who work hand and glove to try to bring peace and reconciliation. Name the country in Africa. I've been all over Sudan. I've been all over other countries, including DR Congo. It's the same thing over and over again. They're not listened to as well as they should be. The G20 provides at least a modest, hopefully a real opportunity to say, do it there. And in terms of the Human Rights Council and formerly the Commission, I've gone over there so many times, and I was just over there recently on anti-Semitism when they refused to recognize October 7th for what it was. And we tried. I actually did a concurrent meeting right there within 50 feet of where they were meeting, and they wouldn't even meet with a woman, nor with the Secretary General of the UN, Gutierrez, who saw her son picked up by the folks, the Hamas people, and thrown into a back of a pickup truck, his dead body having been slaughtered in October 7th. So they have had a very poor record. I think we should be there fighting, but they have a very poor record, and you look at who makes it up, it's rogue nations. So there's a very coherent argument to be made that it is not a human rights council that it could be. When the reforms from Commission were being contemplated, I argued at the UN over and over again about not allowing rogue nations to have a seat there, like China. And they get a seat, they get to run interference all the time. So our hope here, and I know you disagree with it, is to say to the administration, here's an opportunity. None of us are perfect. Obama wasn't perfect. Clinton wasn't perfect. Reagan wasn't perfect. I served all of them. Bush's weren't perfect. None of us are perfect. But it's an opportunity, I think, to tee up an idea whose time has come, led by the largest Muslim country on the face of the earth, Indonesia. And I think we ought to respect that and do our best. You know, this meeting doesn't take place until December. There's lots of opportunity to do good things, and I hope that we can. So I'd like to ask Maryanne Glendon if you could just, Professor, speak a little bit to the issue of why this R20 would be so important right now.
Since you mentioned China, Mr. Chairman, in addition to what I said earlier about why the R20 would be good for the G20, I would add a couple of thoughts about security. And one would be that an R20 would help to counter Chinese bid for dominance in the Indo-Pacific region. And it would do so because, as has been mentioned by several people, the future of Islam, at least the largest number of Islamic adherents in the world, is in Asia. And yet, what is very little known is the transformative power and influence of the tolerant, pluralistic, religious freedom committed form of Islam for which Indonesia is a showcase. Indonesia, the fourth largest country in the world, a Muslim democracy, a successful Muslim democracy that was recently named by Templeton Harvard DeBaylor study as #1 in the world in a study of human flourishing, as distinct from the many human happiness studies, human flourishing. So one advantage that we haven't discussed yet was the effect on a G20 under the presidency of the United States. That magnifies these geopolitical advantages. And the other I would mention is, of course, that it would help to counter the influence of jihadist Islam by showcasing the form of Islam that has the world's largest Muslim organization, 100 million members, and very attractive and growing and engaged in a process of collaboration with centrist Democrat International, which is the largest center-right political organization in the world. These voices are transformative, potentially transformative, and the United States would have a chance to highlight them in connection with the general purposes of the G20, which, as we've been saying, are fostering economic security, peace, and cooperation.
Well, thank you all, thank you all for being here. I appreciate it. I think this is an important topic, and I'll be honest with you, I am worried that we in this country are not focused nearly enough, nor are we consistent when it comes to making human rights a centerpiece of our foreign and international policies. I think we're terribly inconsistent. I think we pick sides too often, and as a result, we lose credibility. I mean, if we believe in human rights for all, then we believe in human rights for all. If we believe in religious freedom, then we believe in religious freedom for everybody, regardless whether we agree with a particular religion or follow a particular religion or not. Dr. Elsanousi, in your remarks, you mentioned the Trump administration's designation of Nigeria as a country of particular concern. Christians are notable targets of religiously motivated violence. That's been well documented. But we have also learned that moderate Muslims are also frequently impacted. My question is, how are Nigerian Muslims impacted by the violence perpetrated by religious extremists, and what efforts exist to mount an interfaith response to violence in Nigeria?
Thank you so much, Chairman McGovern, for this question. And, you know, it's, I must say that, you know, your opening statement, and I know that true for Chairman Smith as well, that, you know, Muslims in Nigeria also suffered from the, you know, the terrorist attacks that is basically perpetrated by Boko Haram. I just want to share with you the example of Imam Abu Bakr Abdullahi. He's an imam in the Plateau State. This imam, we just lost him. He passed away this year. He saved 200 Christians. When Boko Haram came to the state and came to his neighborhood to basically kill Christians, he stood between Boko Haram terrorist group and the Christian community, and he saved 200 Christians. The governor of that state actually was with us, probably Chairman Smith, you met with him, the Plateau State. The governor was here, attended the Earth Summit, which is co-chaired by our good friend, Ambassador, you know, Switz is here. The governor came, I met with the governor, he was appreciating what this imam has done. I'm making this example to say that, you know, we need that interfaith and interreligious collaborations to protect the religious freedom for everyone, everywhere. We cannot basically work with one group. We need to have that collaborative efforts to continue the protection and advancement of religious freedom. I also want to say that the way that we see the efforts to bring religious communities into the G20, it must be in an inclusive manner. We have seen successful examples of our inclusivity. The Earth Summit, the International Religious Freedom Summit that I mentioned, which was actually born out of the first term administration when they established the Ministerial to Advance Religious Freedom. Ambassador Brownback led that effort for 4 years. After he left office, he and Ambassador Switz created this International Religious Freedom Summit, which became the largest global inclusive platform to advance religious freedom. So what I am recommending, we need to build on the efforts we already accomplished to move forward. Thank you.
Mr. Busby, UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights Defenders Mary Lawler condemned the killing of Alex Preddy by federal agents and identified him as someone actively engaged in human rights defense. In the United States, we often frame conversations about violations such as these in the language of civil rights rather than human rights. How can we as members of Congress collaborate with the UN human rights system to correctly identify violations of internationally recognized human rights here in the United States, and what options do you see for holding perpetrators accountable?
Well, thank you for the question, Co-Chair McGovern. I think, you know, the Commission is among the bodies that can help frame what we traditionally understand as civil rights in the U.S. as human rights. So I think it is a question of educating the American public, the American media, about the overlap between these two concepts, that they're not contradictory or separate endeavors, that they are very much overlapping. I mean, in terms of accountability in the U.S., we have tremendous mechanisms for accountability, as good as any in the world. We have state courts, we have local courts, we have state courts, we have federal courts, we have state institutions, state prosecutors, state police, federal prosecutors. Federal entities like the Civil Rights body within the U.S. Department of Justice. All of these entities need to be brought to bear on these sorts of situations. And I must say, I'm really disappointed to see the federal government blocking state authorities from looking into the Preddy killing. I think it's appropriate to have both state and federal authorities looking hard at a horrible killing like this.
Let me just say for the record, I'm a proud citizen of this country. I love this country more than anything. I'm proud to serve in the United States Congress. Sometimes I get frustrated that I think we have some that think that when it comes to talking about human rights, that somehow we're above it, that we don't fit in the same category, that we are not ever guilty of human rights violations, whether it be here, in our homeland or halfway around the world. Which brings me to a question I'll ask to Ms. Glendon and Mr. Taylor. My parish priest back in Worcester, Massachusetts, complains to me all the time about the fact that a huge number of his parishioners are getting frightened to show up to Mass. They're afraid of ICE, they're afraid of being targeted, they're afraid of being questioned, they have kids, and their backgrounds, quite frankly, run the spectrum. Some of them are here totally legally. There's not even a question, but there is a fear, and there's a fear of being targeted. And Cardinal Timothy Dolan of New York, led a group of religious leaders in encouraging President Trump to recognize the G20. But he also expressed concerns that ICE raids on churches in New York were preventing people from exercising their right to freedom of religion. I don't always agree with Cardinal Dolan. I'm more of a Jesuit Catholic, but I nonetheless admire him and respect, much of what he has stood for over his long career. But Cardinal Dolan, I think, is lucky to have a relationship with the president and this administration. And he says that he was able to get the raids in New York to stop and therefore ease the pressure on people who wanted to worship, and gave them more comfort to be able to show up to Mass. But those raids continue elsewhere, and there are concerns in Massachusetts, where I'm from. So how, in your view, do these ongoing violations impact U.S. efforts to promote religious freedom at the G20?
Well, thank you for that question. I think we would all agree that the United States should model compliance with the Universal Declaration. And as it happens, I chaired a commission for the U.S. State Department, and we issued a report in 2020. It was called the Commission on Unalienable Rights, and the number one conclusion, recommendation in that report was the United States should assume the role it has had in the modern world as a champion of human rights, and to do so not only in foreign policy, but modeling it with its own behavior. And so I am in total sympathy with what your remarks about universal human rights, with what Scott Busby said in his first few recommendations in his written testimony. And so I would ask anyone who has influence in the State Department to recommend that our report, which contains many recommendations that I think all of you here would, maybe nearly everyone here would agree upon, I would like someone to ask Secretary Rubio to adopt that report, which, I'm sorry to say, Secretary Blinken repudiated in his first week in office with a speech that indicates he couldn't possibly have read it, because if he had read it, he would have endorsed every single one of our conclusions. And I believe you would, Representative McGovern, and I believe you would, Scott. So I think I have no disagreement with the idea that we ought to lead the world as champions of human rights at home. But the question here before the House is, how do we get to these results? I think a great start would be for the United States presidency of the G20 to showcase some of these ideas that we have been discussing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your question. The way I came to know Ambassador Glendon is precisely because of her serving as chairperson of the Commission on Inalienable Rights. The chairman of Nahdlatul Ulama read that report in full. I read the report in full. We invited Ambassador Glendon and the Secretary of State to Indonesia to speak on this subject. It had a tremendous effect. One of the effects, actually, was on China, because it introduced the issue of human rights in China, the persecution of Uyghurs, into public discourse in Indonesia, and it became the hottest topic in Indonesia on the day that Secretary Pompeo was there. Nahdlatul Ulama officially endorsed at the R20, and also Nahdlatul Ulama's Young Adults Movement, Gerakan Pemuda Ansor, endorsed the Core report because we saw it as a very principled, committed understanding and endorsement of a certain set of universal principles of human rights that we believe people of faith of any nation, any religion around the world could hopefully agree upon. And so we introduced at the first R20, Maryanne Glendon spoke there, delivered a keynote address, and we brought the Core report front and center and included in this volume, which is the proceedings of the R20 International Summit of Religious Leaders in Bali, Indonesia. Congressman Smith, you have a copy, I believe. Congressman McGovern, I'll be happy to give you this copy. But basically, the work that Maryanne Glendon did to promote human rights through the Core report, which basically encompassed both the foundational principles of the U.S. Human Rights Project, as expanded to encompass the civil rights, rights for people of every race and ethnicity and faith here in America, as well as the core principles of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights were fully endorsed by the R20 with the full knowledge and participation of Nahdlatul Ulama. Thank you.
Let me just say one final thing. I know we're going to have a vote on it shortly, and I know Mr. Smith may have some more comments. But I am, you know, I worry sometimes that that we don't talk about human rights consistently, and sometimes, you know, whether we know it or not, we weaponize human rights in a way that I guess is designed to protect one particular group, but oftentimes ends up hurting another particular group. And I believe, you know, I'm a man of faith. I'm proud of my faith, but I also believe that, you know, that while we need to do everything we can to promote religious freedom through the R20 and, you know, other methods, we also need to also acknowledge that if we're consistent on human rights, we need to also protect people who do not believe and who do not practice a particular religion. You know, the first words of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights are, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. We all have different opinions, but we're living in a time, even in this country, where if you're transgender, if you're gay, if you fit into a category that one particular religion doesn't accept, you're oftentimes a subject of persecution and discrimination, not just here, but all over the world. And when I think of human rights, I think of it more holistically. It's just not, you know, and I think we have to be very, very careful. Again, I began with the question on Nigeria. Almost everything that we're getting up here on Nigeria is just about the persecution of Christians, not about the persecution of moderate Muslims. And I don't know whether that's intentional or whether that's an oversight, but it's a problem. You know, and even as we're talking about the current conflict we're in right now with Iran, I think we have to be very, very careful on how we characterize what the Iranian people believe in terms of their religion. so as to not weaponize, our human rights vocabulary or the freedom of religion. But I care very deeply about this, and I want to make sure that we live up to our obligations. And Mr. Smith and I have differences of opinions on a whole bunch of stuff. But I think we both have in common the fact that everybody in the world, every human being in the world, is indeed born free and equal in dignity and rights. And I want to make sure we don't veer from that. And it doesn't matter who's in the White House; we have to worry about that. But in any event, I appreciate everybody being here, and I thank you for coming to talk about this. And I hope that you will stay in touch with us and tell us how we can do better, and how we can be better advocates, not only in this commission named after a great human rights champion, Tom Lantos, but also when administration officials come before us, that we're asking the appropriate questions, the right questions, and we're getting them to understand, that the importance of human rights being kind of the centerpiece of our foreign policy and our domestic policy as well. But I thank the chairman for his indulgence. I yield back.
Very much. Just underscore something that I think is important to underscore. I'm the author of the Frank Wolf International Religious Freedom Act, which we passed into law in 2016, Public Law 114-281. And the opening definition, findings, says freedom of thought, conscience, and religion is understood to protect theistic and non-theistic beliefs and the right not to profess any or practice any religion at all. So the point is, if you don't want to believe, that's your right. And I put it as the opening finding in a law that I wrote back in 2016, 2017. Let me just, I want to thank, he's not here in person, but Mr. Shellenberger, is there something that you might want to add? You're out of sight, but you're not out of mind, if you could. Can't hear you.
Sorry about that. Yeah, just wanted to affirm the goodwill there in terms of having a universal application of all human rights, including free speech. I would point out we have 2 cases now in Brazil, 1 case in Mexico of individuals who are being censored by their government and threatened with jail time for not agreeing to go along with the current orthodoxy on trans issues. These are people that have referred to people that identify as transgender as men. So I think that as we're raising awareness, particularly on these gender issues, and wanting to be fair to both sides, I think we should all agree that nobody should go to prison for not going along with someone else's religious view, which I think is a religious view of transgenderism.
Thank you. Let me just conclude, and again, I want to thank you for this suggestion, which I will at least convey to the White House as something that I think is extremely important, notwithstanding Mr. Busby's objections. I really think that, hope is always rekindled when you take positive action. Marco Rubio, our Secretary of State, and I co-chaired the China Commission for a number of years, and you know how well we all work together on all issues relevant to religious freedom there. One of the first hearings we had was with a woman who had been tortured in the People's Republic of China by Xi Jinping, his people, because she was a Uyghur Muslim. And she came and testified. She was a mother of 3 children, and she asked, why am I being tortured? And the response back at our hearing was, because you're a Muslim and because you're a Uyghur. So it's important, I think, for the G20 to have, especially with China as participants, to see that it's interconnected with other things. It's not in isolation, just religious freedom. It's connected to trade. It's connected to everything. I often say to my colleagues, when you travel, please take lists of religious prisoners of conscience in the country where you're going to. The first person and really the only person pursuant to the International Religious Freedom Act who was censored and told he couldn't come here was Modi in India. only one. Obama changed that when he became the head of government, and I think that was a reasonable thing to do because now he must travel as head of government. But he was singled out because of what he did to who? Muslims. And here we are speaking on, so I think every time someone travels to India, they should have a list of people that need to be gotten out of prison and to talk about tolerance for all faiths of every kind. So, and that's what we're trying to do here. And I do think the president could have an outsized positive impact on this. Marco Rubio, who believes, we know how committed he is to religious freedom. I do, at least, because I've talked to him so many times. And we will be getting the CPC countries soon. I think it's late. Again, and I can't say this enough, I had numerous hearings where we asked President Obama, his people, please send us the list. You're 2 years late. Where is it? And, there wasn't a lot of angst other than from me because I thought it was a missed opportunity to protect people who, by singling out a country that has done terrible misdeeds. So, yes.
I think Mr. Busby was trying to get recognition.
Were you?
To say something?
I thought you, yeah.
Yeah, just very briefly. I was a civil servant for over 30 years, served 6 different administrations working on human rights refugee issues. The U.S. is never going to be perfect domestically, but we were always stronger internationally when we acknowledged our shortcomings and were making active efforts to address it, A. And B, when we reinforced the Universal Declaration and the principles that went with it. And I'm not seeing both those things right now, which is the most concerning thing to me about this administration. So if we could be better on reaffirming the universal principles along with demonstrating real intent to address our own problems, I think we'd be a lot better off.
Okay. Thank you. And, one of my favorite songs, maybe yours as well, is America the Beautiful. I love that phrase in it, to mend thy every flaw. We know we have flaws, and we have many. And our founders certainly recognized that and built in ways of reforming even the Constitution, should it be found to be inferior to what needs to be done. So that's what we strive to do. We all make mistakes, but I hope we can, this would be an opportunity, I think, this R20, to advance religious freedom and First Amendment type rights dealing with speech as never before, with a whole group of people that I think will have a willing audience, with many that will be there. And I like we saw with Indonesia, China was not overly antagonistic to this when it was raised. They probably didn't like it, but I can't go to China anymore. I'm on the can't go list. I had 107 hearings on human rights in China, 107 that I've chaired. They are bad and getting worse. So we need to find a way of, through all means. I introduced a bill, and I just say this parenthetically, to relink human rights and trade to China. Bill Clinton, to his credit and then lack of, had done an executive order that was outstanding on linking human rights and trade. I traveled over to China. I said, I'm with Bill Clinton. And then on May 26, 1994, he delinked them. And unfortunately, we lost a great opportunity to advance all human rights across the board. His executive order covered everything. It was an amazing piece of statecraft, and then he reversed it. So,
Mr. Chair, I just say one thing. So I wear these Tibetan prayer beads. A year and a half ago, I went to Dharamsala in India and met with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And he gave me these Tibetan prayer beads. He blessed them. He told me that it helped deal with my negativity, my worries, my concerns, and my fears. And I'm anxious to see him again to tell him that they're not working. I am really worried about the state of human rights in the world today. And I am worried about what I fear is a lack of commitment by our country to human rights. I hope I'm proven wrong on that. But I think all of us, and I think it's the whole purpose of this commission, is to make sure that we keep on raising these issues over and over and over and over again. I appreciate everybody being here for offering your words of wisdom and your testimony. But we just have to do better. I mean, I think the world is counting on us. I mean, people here in this country are counting on us. I mean, the calls that I get and the town halls that I have and some of the things that people say, I would never have heard 5 years ago or 10 years ago. And I just think we talk a lot about national security. Sometimes we forget that upholding a high standard of human rights is actually in our national security interest. And it's not just the number of bombs we have, it's, our advocacy for the rights of people all over the world. So again, I thank you for indulging me, and I yield back.
Thank you. I want to thank again our distinguished panelists for your testimony, your insights. The hearing is adjourned.